without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, this afternoon, whatever it is, George Whitten. George has been living here for how many? All your life?
Yeah,
Okay.
61.
Have you lived here your whole life, George? Not yet. And I've known George for probably 24, if not 25 years myself. So we worked together on the stopping the trans-basin water diversions over the years. George went on to get onto the Rio Grande Water Conservation District and has nobly served there in good capacity for a long time. He's been, well, I'm going to stop talking. I'm just going to turn it over to you. You can give your own background on how you came by the holistic land management and all that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Give him a hand first. Eh?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's nice to be in a room of people who aren't thinking about killing each other. I don't get to go to very many meetings where people are actually trying to be helpful. And so this is nice. I appreciate the crowd and the friendly faces. So Mark called a while back and wanted me to give a presentation to the Roundtable about ranching in the San Luis Valley. And so I've been thinking about that since. And you know, specifically, people usually want us to talk about holistic management, which is one of the things that's a guiding principle for our ranch, and I'll touch on that a little bit. But it's not. I mean, tonight I'm not really going to talk about any techniques or any monitoring stuff or anything. I want to talk about how I feel like we got to where we are as a culture and a society. And ranching in the San Luis Valley is such a privilege, and this is a place that is like no other in the world, and we're like a canary in a coal mine right now. And drought, when drought comes and it comes here, it comes hard, and it comes fast, and it doesn't go away. It's like the cold. And the people that have lived here, and all of my ancestors, and the people that have lived here all their lives, they're steeped with that toughness and that, you know, they just know that this is a tough place, and you have to be kind of prepared, but you have to respect it and you have to think about it. And there's more to all this than making money or moving cows, and you know, there's a lot to this. And you know, the trappers, Lewis and Clark, made their trip in 1804 and 1806, and I just want you to kind of get this time frame in your mind of how quickly European settlement happened until this building was built. I mean, it's just not been very long, in geologic time especially, but even in our own times, I mean, it's not that many generations back that these are, my grandfather's dad did this stuff, you know? And so they first, and you know, it was what, 30 years till trappers were really starting to come across and interface with the native people and all of that, and look at the country over when they came. And then the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. That's only 30 years after those trappers started coming across the Missouri River. And by 1900s, trains were going over Poncha Pass, and there was a railroad through the San Luis Valley. And by that time, my grandfather was here. He was here in 1897, and he came on the train. And Moffett, the town of Moffett, was a loading point for more lambs than anywhere else in the United States. And it was a thriving economy, and it built the ranches along the Swatch Creek and the entire valley. And Moscow, along that same tracks, had a flour mill, and they developed irrigation and the farms there, and it was all based on a piece of technology, which are the railroads, that gave us access to markets that nobody had before that point. If you think about the Hispanic people who lived here, the Mexican people who were here, not really this far north in the valley, but in the northern end of New Mexico and the southern end of the valley, they didn't have thousands and thousands and thousands of sheep, because where would they sell them? I mean, you can only eat so much mutton and wear so much wool. Their economy was based on a very local, and so they didn't really move their animals that far, and they didn't have a big market. But when that railroad came through, that was a technology just like the internet. It changed everything, and it gave us access to a market that we never had before. And so we were able to build a society and a culture. My ancestors were part of that, and it was a market-driven overuse of our natural resources. My grandfather was the first forest ranger in Saskatchewan, and his job was to count the sheep and the cattle. And he has records of counting 19,000 head of sheep and 12,000 head of cattle that went to Saskatchewan Park. And so it was an interesting time, and you know, it was. My father described the dust that roiled around Moffat when he was a young man in the 1930s, taking lambs to market in Moffat. He couldn't see the sheep part of the time because there were so many lambs being loaded at market. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but south of Moffat, along Highway 17, there's 2 railroad tracks there. Have you ever wondered why there's 2 railroad tracks? Well, the reason is because they had to have some place to park the trains that were loading the livestock so that then other trains could go by. It's about 14 miles of track to set trains on so they can wait and be loaded. And my dad told me about taking lambs down there, and another train would come through, blowing its whistle, and you've got lambs, and it's dark, and there's sheep everywhere, and there's dust, and you couldn't see, and everything ran. All the animals in the pens would run to the other side of the pen and almost knock the fences down, and it was crazy putting those animals on that train. And how the animals survived the trip to Denver, I don't know, but they did, and there was a market, and it was a market like we never had before. And due to the thousands of sheep and cattle in the West and the pressure that they caused on the resources, the Taylor Grazing Act was enacted in 1934. And that was less than 100 years from the time when the trappers crossed that, and it was a market that nobody thought would change. And they tore those tracks up in 1940. All of our corrals on the ranch are made out of oak gates and railroad ties that came out of the Moffat stockyards. They're still good. The railroad was the first technology to bring a world market to San Luis Valley, and at the same time, we were developing an irrigation canal system to increase our ability to meet the needs, and so was everybody else in America. It all was happening about the same time. And water's always been the measure of the value of a ranch, and I've always heard if you don't have any water, you don't have anything. So the well just rolled out of the ground in the good old days. That's an artesian well flowing about 1,200 gallons a minute. And I've seen my grandfather was on my mother's side was a well driller, and he made well rigs out of Model 8 parts that could drill thousands of, well, over 1,000 feet, a 16-inch artesian well into the ground over 1,000 feet deep. Not a safety device anywhere on that thing, I can tell you. And so, you know, we like to think things were better back in the old days, and they were, but we didn't really look very far, I don't think. That was about 4 years before Vietnam. Equipment was simpler and much more in parity with our production. Every farm along the Rio Grande Canal had a family on it, and there was a mix of sheep and cattle and crops, and so the farms were diverse, and it was all flood irrigation pretty much. There were wells put in the 50s to start to mitigate the drought that came in because the canal systems were, you know, but that's a flood irrigation system, just like goes clear back to Moorish time, just like the acequia system used its ditches and irrigation canvases and lands, and that's we were putting up hay there. Anyway, things changed, and efficiency and scale has always been the natural law in agriculture. And as we've changed from flood to sprinkler irrigation, the efficiencies that are derived from that type of irrigation really wasn't thought about in a holistic way. Just like a lot of things, any new piece of technology never passes through a filter other than can we sell it. And so that wasn't passed through a filter of any kind, and certainly wasn't thought about in a holistic way. And as sprinklers went in all around us, we couldn't we couldn't flood irrigate anymore because our water wouldn't run down the ditch and it just went in the ground before it got. So we had to put on a sprinkler. And we also, at the same time, increased our acreage, by the way. And we increased the income to the ranch, and we put that in our pocket. And so we realized early on, my dad did, that that wasn't going to last forever, but the other option was to not do anything. And so we did. We put on sprinklers, and we were able to irrigate more land and raise more crop. Then things began to change in the new millennium, and I think we all know about 2003 is when it started. This is a piece of land that I own that's it's a sell center for strip grazing or wagon wheel type, a whole savory type grazing deal, clear back from about 1988 or 89. And it was on a piece of land that is pretty much dry land, but the Warner Arroyo runs through there, and it's flood irrigated once in a while, and it's sub-irrigated. And I haven't had one head of stock on that land in 5 years because there's nothing there to eat right now. The aquifer's so depleted that we can't use that big part of our range. And, you know, I could get angry about that. You know, beginning in 2003, we were faced with drought, like I just said, and we turned to our property rights and began to fight for our place in the priority system. People hired lawyers, and it's still going on today, rooms full of sweaty men with anger and hate, and it'll go on forever. But the reason is because we have an entire economy, and probably our whole culture is at stake. We have based everything we do on a resource that may not be there. And it's serious business to change direction when you're on a train, and there's 3,300 pivots in the valley in order to restore. You guys have all seen these numbers 1,000 times. But the last thing is that admitting that climate change is a reality and planning for it, to me, is a better choice. And that's what I've decided to do. We've become migratory. I'm not going to worry about my private property. I'm not going to worry about my water rights other than what it takes to maintain myself as a citizen. But I have to do something. I have to survive. And one of the great things about having livestock is that they're ungulates, and ungulates are migratory. And they go where the feed is. So that's what we've done. We rest our BLM range, and we've started to move. This is a graph of our management skills reflected in reality, and Peggy showed this. This is her favorite graph, I think, but it's also, it's not my favorite certainly, but that's what I really think about it. And
so what are those lines mean?
These are the change in the unconfined aquifer in the San Luis Valley over since 1972 to 2000, and I don't know, that one goes to 2000.
Not the whole valley.
No, this is sub-district number 1, basically. And it's the graph that you see all the time.
That's
it's the depletion in the aquifer.
Here down south,
Right.
not quite here, but basically down
Yeah,
the river.
from County Road G south to the river, basically, and over to Highway 17, thereabouts. And so, the thing about it is that, you know, when the environment's changing like this, it probably doesn't have any regard for my water rights or my property rights. And when we're going to survive, we've got to figure out how to do that. And that's what I was starting to tell you about migrating. We've had a history of failed attempts. That's an old house that's right by our farm. It's been like that. It was abandoned in the 50s, and it still looks just like that today. Inside that house is fine woodwork and wainscoting, and those people didn't build that house thinking they were going to leave and walk away. And now it's an owl's nest, and skunks live in there. But, you know, they had dreams. They had hopes. This is a windy day in the valley as seen from space in 2012. That was a particular day in May. This is the San Luis Valley. This is up towards Villa Grove. You can see the dust is boiling off of the farmland down there. And this is the wet mountain valley. Going all the way to Kansas, you can see that plume of dust. And when I first got on the water board, I gave every one of my members on the board a picture of that. The first day I showed up and I said, we've got to do something about this. This can't go on. That's our wealth. That's our lives. It's going over that. I don't know how many tons, thousands, 100,000 tons of dirt went into the atmosphere that day. And it happens fairly regularly. You all have all seen it. That was what it was like on the ground. We were ultrasounding cattle that day. And the thing about ultrasounding cattle, the technician only comes once a year, and when he's there, you got to do it. And so we did. We ultrasounded about 250 head of cattle that day, and it was not fun. So I'm talking about all this stuff and this water stuff, and it really gets tiring, and it makes us despair. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I'd like to not be so tired sometimes. And so, for one thing, not every day is like that. And Julie and we have decided to seek a future that honors the past and gives us hope for the future. Using holistic management as a guide, we're finding ways to not just survive, but thrive in a changing world. We use a triple bottom line concept that requires us to consider the environment, the economy, and the community every time you make a major decision. It's like a three-legged stool, and if one of those things isn't right, then it won't stand. And so we have to make money, we have to be a part of the economy, but we also have to take care of our land. And we have to take care of our community, because we can't live in a community that won't take care of us. My dad was a member of John Birch Society, and I grew up in a household that was fearful of the government. And I realized that at some point that I don't want to live in a place where I'm going to have to shoot somebody if they come to my door. I just don't want to do that. I want to share food with them, or I want to live in a community that's a good place to live. And so to me, that's a very important thing. So it takes support, partnership, and good old-fashioned work. And Julie and I try to make conscious choices about our lives, and we do it every day to find every ways to build our soil, our community, and our economy. And I'm going to show you some of the things that we're doing now that make a difference to us in our lives. We have partnered with the Quivira Coalition, which is a group in New Mexico. Let me take that back one. There we go. That is mentoring the next generation of young agrarian leaders. There are a lot of young people out there who have no access to farmland, who have in their hearts and their souls, they want to be farmers, they want to come back to the land, and they want to learn how to do it sustainably. And I don't really like the word sustainable, because I don't want to have a sustainable relationship with my wife. I'd like it to be better than that. But it's what we use. It's one of the terms that we've come to use. And these kids don't have a chance. If they're not born into agriculture, if they're not rich enough to buy their way into it, they really don't have a chance. They can go to a land-grant university and learn how to be an ag business person, but that's really not. How are they going to learn to farm? How are they going to learn to drive a staple right? How are they going to learn to do some financial things? How are they going to learn to make choices every day? So we partnered with the Quivira Coalition, and that was our first apprentice. That's Amber Reed. She right now is managing or co-managing co-managing a farm in New Hampshire that's doing grass-fed beef and dairy. And she's a wonderful herdsman, a dairy herd person. She had never been around cattle in her life when she came to the ranch, but she was such a great stockman. And she could see things that were wrong with those cattle way before I could. She could tell when an animal was going to get sick before it knew it was going to get sick. She was wonderful. And she's pursued a life in dairy. She learned to make cheese at the James Ranch. And so she's doing really well. This is Sam Ryerson. Sam is managing about, I think they're up to somewhere around, do you remember the number? Oh. Anyway, Sam's managing a huge ranch on the border between Arizona and New Mexico, right where the big wallow was at the wallow fire that went through there, and then the next year he had another one. That was really all on his ranch, and he learned how to. He had about 750 head of cattle on there, and they kept him on that ranch during the fire, and they learned how to manage cattle in fire. while it was going on. How to feed him, how to keep him safe, how to work in the smoke, how to keep his hired men from leaving. Anyway, so Sam was, he recently just decided to leave. That's a great position as a manager there, but he's decided to go out and try to lease his own ranch. This is Amy Wright. Amy Wright was our third apprentice, and she's going through a second year of apprenticeship at the Chico Basin Ranch with Duke Phillips out there, and so she works with the people over at Madno Zapata and those guys. And she's, I think Duke's has taken her on, has his first female full apprentice, which is a big deal for Duke Phillips. Okay. Now that's Martha Skelly. Martha was our apprentice last year, and she is currently floating around in Australia, I think, right at the moment. But she's been asked to go back to
Warren Wilson
College, where she went to school and run the cattle or the livestock
be an
program.
assistant farm manager
Yeah, assistant farm manager there. So
for
she's
their on-campus farm.
so okay. Next. And that's our current slate. That's Drew Cole, and he's from California, and he's a great young man, very studious fellow, and he's got me hooked on what's it called, radio
Lab.
Yeah, Radio Lab. So we drive around talking about whether or not blue exists, and you know what kind of stuff. Yeah, we've got to figure it out. That's at the Cabrera Conference in 2012, that was a group of all of our young apprentices, and giving a talk in front of a group of about 600 people. Okay, next.
Are you delivering it today?
Anyway, the answers to living sustainably on this planet are truly right under our feet, and they extend all the way to the horizon. Next. So one of the things we've done is to save fossil fuel is we've made something new out of something old. That's an old tractor that my grandfather had. It's a 1946 VA seat case tractor, and it's pretty much the main tractor on the farm. We have a bigger one that was made in 1973. It's a big international, and we pull a windrower with it. But we've put up hay for about 25 years without ever baling any hay. I don't bale hay. My cattle graze every day of the year. Bales today are worthless to me. I can't pick one up. I can't do anything with it without starting a damn tractor, and I can't start a tractor in the cold. And so my cows are always grazing. They graze year-round, snow, whatever. So the reason we do that is because we were cheap and we didn't want to buy a baler. But what we really did is we recycled nutrients, we captured solar energy, we increased organic matter, we reduced fossil fuel, we increased biodiversity, and we made money. That's a triple bottom line kind of thinking. All of that hay is cycled through a cow and right back on the ground. And the seed is cycled through a cow and right back on the ground. And that feed right now, I just did feed tests on this stuff under about a month ago, and it's got 180 relative feed value, and its protein is about 17%. Now that's native hay, but it's native hay that's full of vetches, it's full of legumes, there are hundreds of different plants in that. It's not just grass anymore.
And just to add, there's no fertilizer other than the cow's manure and urine. We're certified organic. So that's just what the land can do. It's treated well.
It also uses a lot less water because there's so much organic matter in the soil. And that's, we'll go to the next one, I think. A 1% increase in soil organic matter will hold from 16,500 to 18,000 gallons of water per acre. That's 6.25 acre feet per 120 acres. That's the size of every one of these circles that you see out there that we're blowing across the divide. That's 20,658 acre feet of water if we did that. Just 1% increase in organic matter in that soil, and it's free. Because the water stays in the soil. Mineral soil has no water holding capacity. Water is either moving down through it or back out through evaporation. If it doesn't have some organic matter in it, there's nothing for the water molecules to cling to. And so that's why it's so important to build organic matter. Next. So we're reintroducing animals to farm ground as part of our strategy to survive in a hotter, drier world. And our migration now is a little shorter. When we first started in 2003, we migrated all the way to Albuquerque and helped revegetate a bombing site. But now we just migrate down to our neighbors who have water and sprinklers down south, and they raise crops for us to get through the winter in exchange for our dung and our urine and our management skills on these farms. Because they know they have to get organic matter back in that soil. And so the organic farmers that are down there are way ahead of the others, but they're learning to use animals to help them increase organic matter. So this is part of our winter migration in 2013, and I just want you to think about what the value of this is to a farmer. I've sat down and talked about the amount of nitrogen and the amount of phosphorus and all of that gets on field, so we can convert that into what they don't have to buy from a fertilizer dealer. But the microrhizomes and the things that are in that soil are so amazing that nobody even knows what we're doing, because it's just so much more alive than a dead piece of soil that's been nuked with chemicals. And so we're doing way more than we think we're, and they don't want to pay much for it. In fact, we have to buy the feed. But the feed costs for me in the wintertime are way less than they would be if I was buying hay. So
do you haul your cattle down there, is that what you're saying?
yeah, we drove them here from where we were at the last time. We lease land. We're only on our ranch about 4 months out of the year now. The rest of the time we're traveling with those cows. But you know, the neighbors will tell you can't do that, but there's 12 inches of crusted snow, 15 degrees to 30 below zero at night, and these cattle are doing fine. And they can move that snow so fast. The secret to running cattle in deep frozen snow is never let them get out and walk around in it, and don't let them out in a field so they'll go around and choice out all the good feed. Make them eat everything every day. And so what we have on that sprinkler, could you back that up on? You see those plastic, these are plastic pipes that 2-inch plastic pipe that we zip tied to the sprinkler and come out and hold an electric fence. So every day we go out and we start the sprinkler up without any water in it, of course, and let it move for so many minutes around the circle, and that gives them the amount of feed they need every day. So we don't have to start a tractor. We are dependent on electricity down there. But it's a way to control the amount of feed they have, and then there's so many cows in a tight bunch in that snow that they eat everything that's there. And they can push that snow out of the way and eat that feed perfectly fine. They don't need anybody to help them do that. They just need to have enough energy stored under the snow so that they're not operating at a deficit every day. They have to have, the feed that's there has to be of good quality.
What is the feed?
That's sorghum Sudan grass that they didn't winterize, just went to seed. And so there is some seed on it, which helps, I think.
So was it cut and piled and cured, or is it just standing?
It's just standing, yeah, and the snow just pushed it down on the
So the
ground.
processing cost is almost nothing.
Almost
I mean, there is
nothing.
no cost.
Yeah, we're getting 222 animal days per acre there. That's about 3.5 to, well, it's closer to 5 tons per acre if you bale it. So.
George, where's this operation at now?
Well, you know where this is on the 102, or the 2.5 mile and the 106.
Okay.
Uh,
Let me ask you something else. The Division of Wildlife, on your loss of hay to the wildlife, do they reimburse you for that? Do you have any way to calculate something like that?
Oh, no, I don't worry about it. It's not a loss.
Do you have a lot of elk that might...
We put up piles on the Baca one year, on the refuge. We piled about 250 acres there with Ron. And I don't know how many elk there are on the Baca, but they never touched those piles. They don't bother.
Didn't recognize
Yeah.
because they were there.
Yeah, they were there, but they didn't bother. So
It wasn't really bad.
anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. But one of the other things we're doing is I'm the founder or one of the founding members of Sweetgrass Co-op, which is a cooperative of I think now about 15 to 17 ranches, something like that. And we are in the business of marketing grass-fed beef, both organic and non-organic. And Julie and I have our own label, Blue Range Ranch, which many of you are customers and buy our meat on a regular basis. But in order to improve the community and try to make this thing really work, I decided to form a cooperative with ranchers who are all doing pretty much the same thing, but it's really a lot of work to keep track of the inventory and take care of all that stuff. So if we could hire one person who could do that for us, and we sold under one label, and the meat met a certain standard, it was finished, well finished, and it was ultrasounded, and it was, the quality was there, and then we had markets. And so Sweetgrass Cooperative will market over 1,500 animals by 2015. We're not quite there yet. We have 17 members, and they range in size from people with 50 head to 2,500 head. And all of our sales are local in the Rio Grande Basin. Most of our processing is done locally. Mel Armio down here at Mel's does a big part of our processing. When we first, first started with Mel, he had 3 employees. It was him and his dad and his boy, Matt, that ran that little processing plant. They have, no, the one in Romeo, Colorado.
Romeo, okay.
He's USDA.
He's
certified organic.
We got him certified USDA, and then we got him certified organic, and then we got his computer to talk to his scale. And he has, at times, 15 people working in there now. So this is a little calculation I did. I don't know if you know, this was actually published in the Eagle a while back, but and so the numbers are relative. They're not exactly right. Calves are worth more than that now, but so is processing and so is everything else. But basically, I want you to get the idea here that before the drought, the San Luis Valley produced about 20,000 head of calves, and they were selling for about $600 a piece at the time. That's 12 million bucks. That seemed like a lot of money. And if we'd kept them and sold them as yearlings, they're worth about 14 million. The value of finishing those animals, if you do it the way we do, where we pay these farmers for that feed, pay these farmers to help us finish and feed these animals, that's $7.65 million that was kept right here in this economy and spent right down here. The value of the processing to Mel or somebody like that would be $11 million, that many animals. And if they're sold at 1,100 pounds finished animals, they're worth 24 million bucks. And the retail value of that, if it was sold in stores in this area, $52 million from that little bunch of calves. And all of that goes over the hill and goes to Kansas and to Tyson and to the big feed. And I don't want that to keep happening. One of the things we can do is build our own economy and build it here. That's a resource we have. We have grass, we have cattle and sunlight, and we have people who need work. Let's see if we can't make that work. No, they are northern New Mexico, well, down in the middle of New Mexico and southern Colorado right now. Along the Rio Grande Basin, basically, we don't recognize the state line much. It's, you know,
So
an arbitrary thing.
But there are...
So the south.
Yeah. Yeah, Leroy, mainly.
No, well...
Now, La Montanita they've been a great resource for us. They have 5 stores. We ship them 9 animals every 2 weeks, year-round, never stops. It's a fresh meat market, so it's kind of brutal as far as production. But being in a co-op where we have people who have fall calves and spring calves all the way from southern New Mexico to up the valley, where we're able to fill that market pretty well. And then we've gotten them to pay us more for the off-season. Beef is really seasonal. You shouldn't be able to buy beef any time of the year. It's a very seasonal thing. If you want the best beef and you want it when it's really ready, you do it when the grass is right about September. That's when you harvest. And all the rest of this takes a huge amount of support with hay and other things going on, and especially if we're trying to finish and put the fat on that the American consumer is used to and really have a finished product, then it takes a lot of resources. So they pay us more for the animals that are off-season. So now my producers are figuring out how to produce them off-season and do it cheaper, but, you know, that's just a shot of, I'm sorry.
Was that about?
That's the San Luis Valley Soil Group, Mike Collins' group, and we go to a lot of those meetings. They've been a real resource for us, farmers trying to build their soil. Organic matter is that's a thing, and that's where the feed is. That's where we'll migrate to, and I can't be mad at them because they have water. That doesn't really matter. That's what we have to survive. They have to survive. And we'll work this thing out. But in the meantime, let's utilize the resource and let's get some organic matter in that soil.
So socially, you're developing a symbiotic relationship.
Trying to, yeah, until I go to a water meeting and then I'm not so sure. And so this is my last slide, and I promised I wouldn't be too long-winded. You know, we have to look to engineering, law, and economics for some of the answers. But we also have to look under our feet, and we have to look inside of ourselves. And ranching gives us the opportunity to do all these things, and for that, we truly... Julie will answer all the rest of the questions.
So are there yak in your future?
Is there what?
Yak.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, you know, one of the reasons George and I started the co-op is that we had a lot of friends here in the valley, like the Near and people in Bueno, who are our friends and every competition with their friends. And so I think Kyle's doing an amazing job with yak. I would never want to step unless there was a need. Just a marvelous thing, never intentional. No, well, you know, I'm also Green Party vegetarian Californian, so.
Thank you.
When I drive over to Crestone, I see a lot of areas that are just, how do you bring?
Well, you know, one of the things we stopped doing was showing fence line contrast between our place and the neighbors. It really doesn't do me any good to show people. We've been piling hay since 1989 or something. I haven't bought a baler or put up hay. Nobody around me does it. Well, I do have some thoughts on it. First of all, it's safety. They just don't feel safe. They count bales. That's what we see what we're taught to see. And it's the same thing with property rights. It's the same thing with water rights. We're taught these things from one time. We assume that that's real, that that's actually the way it is. But it really isn't. There are so many different realities in this. And to learn about an animal and how it relates to a piece of land and how it relates to the plants that are there, God, for me, it's the most fascinating thing in the world. I just love figuring that out. And they do it, they've done it for millions of years without bales of hay, without men being involved in any way. Their problem is us, our management. You know, the things that we do, because we have this fence around this piece of land, we decide it's ours and we have to stay there and we can't migrate because it's our private property. And they feel safe with that piece of property. And so now we're trying to manage these little tiny migrations inside this piece of property. And it's not really working. And it's not their fault, it's just their reality. It's truly their reality. Yes?
You showed us that chunk of land that you said you haven't had any animals on for 5 years because it's not producing anything. It's not productive.
Because the aquifer has gone from about 3 foot down to 17 feet. I've got my own monitoring well there and I monitor it. And so the grass plants and the native plants that are there have lost their ability to get water. So there's no amount of grazing management, no amount of...
There's nothing you can do to reclaim that.
Until the aquifer comes back and until Mother Nature sends some help.
Right.
And she may
Although
not.
if there was more organic matter there for the return of the drought, it would recover quicker.
It would recover. There's a lot of organic matter there. It was a very well managed pasture for many years, and there's litter on the ground. There are places where we've fed hay on, because if there's no litter on the ground, we'll go out and feed some hay on the ground, put litter on the ground and cover it. And there are places where we've done that 4 or 5 years ago and that hay's still laying there and it's gray and it's oxidizing and it hasn't moved, because without moisture, none of this grazing stuff matters. Those soil microorganisms can't function without moisture. They just become dormant and they sit there and wait.
So my question was, is there anything you can do to recover or recapture land that has gone sour? You know, it's not productive anymore. And it sounds like your answer is, if the water table isn't there to support it, then there's not a whole lot you can do until the drought ends or the water table comes back.
And for us to take care of our land is the main thing, and so we're not going to keep cattle there when there's nothing to eat.
Right.
And we love our animals, and so
Well, and you love the land too, so you're gonna do
So
what's necessary for it.
Exactly.
And if it means just waiting, then we just wait.
Yeah, we just have to wait. Yeah. And in the meantime, these cows gotta be fed every day. You can't hang them on a clothesline. Just too good.
Turn them off, turn
Yeah.
off the ignition.
But
May I share an answer to his, so a land manager, like a rancher, I mean, the first thing you want to do is find a way to capture a raindrop. And so preparing the land to accept moisture is critical. There's a little moisture out there. But we also talked about the shrub component in the valley that didn't used to be that way. And shrub lands have a higher transpiration rate. They have a deeper root, so they're pumping stuff more than what a grass plant would do. And if you think about the cover on the landscape, there's bare ground between all those, what do you call them, coyote brush or greasewood or whatever. So the land now cannot accept moisture and get it in. And then when it decides to blow and dry out, there's no litter there to keep it from, so you need to cap that soil. So, and then the question is, well, why is it like that? Well, some of it's management that he showed with the sheep and overgrazing. And then the other part is taking the fire out. I'm a landscape ecologist kind of person, so I've studied this 30 years of my career, but so if you look at the landscape scale, the effect of the water cycle, yeah, the water table's dropping. Some of it is management. Most droughts in this country are followed by huge floods, and they're directly related to land management, which we do. But we don't often understand that it's our management, it's not just God not sending the rain. And so it's important to put the blame where the blame goes, which is management, because a good rancher has a drought plan even in the wettest of years. I mean, that's what you said. You've always got to be ready for it not to rain. And we don't treat the land that way in this country. You go across, you get on a plane and fly from Denver to St. Louis, and mostly what you're going to see is bare ground, which does not infiltrate rain, and it facilitates transpiration out. So we're drying thousands of acres. That's just more than you wanted to know.
No. And what you said about a scrub plant, like greasewood or something like that, being detrimental, it can reach the water, but it's just pumping the water out again, as opposed to trying to capture it for something that can be.
And the same is true with the pinyon junipers. If you go back, I've looked at photographs where you have cavalry encampments in Oregon, and the mountainsides behind are totally grasslands. Grasslands have a high infiltration rate, and they cover the landscape, and then they feed herds of ungulates, of deer, so. But if you go take a picture of the same ranch today, it's a solid forest of mountains. It's solid pinyon juniper usually. Pinyon juniper cannot stand fire. So what does that tell you about the periodicity of fire on the landscape? We've taken it all out of this country, and the ecosystems are just collapsing.
Right.
Because the patterns of processes, it's energy flow and sunlight, it's all complicated. It's complicated, but it's not. I mean, if you understand the basic processes that are going on, we've interrupted every ecological process we can in order to take it to market. And it's not good enough.
It's sort of like cutting things up into little chunks when it was designed to be a much more broad spread pattern.
You've got to understand the processes that are at work, and then your management has to mimic natural processes.
It sounds to me though like your operation is really concerned about ecological success.
Not any more than the other two.
not any more than the other two. I mean, I have to make a living. And
I understand that, but you're doing things to stay in the ground, and it seems like your ecological success comes into play.
that pays us. A healthy meadow pays more than anything else, because it's all there. You don't have to add supplement. You don't have to add fertilizer. You don't have to add anything. It's there to harvest, but you have to put it back. And when you put it in a bale of hay and put it on a truck, that's gone, and it's gone forever. You can't get that back.
Very good.
The pasture that you showed us there that was really degraded with the water, obviously you have other parts of your landscape that are not that devastated. Is there a lot of elevation, some elevation change that's responsible for that, or what's the?
We have a well where that meadow is. There's an artesian well there that my grandfather drilled, and so that's why that's like that. So we're using groundwater to maintain that, and that's in jeopardy. I expect this spring to have shut that off, and so we will lose that water. But that soil is healthy, but we'll lose a lot of production, and so I can stand around and get a lawyer and pay him, or I can just get a truck.
Well, then the other two things that we've done besides getting a truck or getting a lawyer is, one thing is because George is managed for biological diversity on that meadow, there are, any biological diversity means that some of those plants are going to be tolerant in any kind of changed conditions. So there are drought tolerant species in there, as well as species that are good in a really wet year. So the species composition will change over time with the loss of that water, but it won't probably turn into bare ground, whereas places that haven't been managed for that diversity don't have the resiliency because the diversity leads to resiliency. So that's one of the strategies I think that will help us during this transition.
Well, it will come back because it's a Supreme Court mandate how quickly.
But doesn't that make sense?
This needs a lot of I really believe that farmers want the water table to come back. The economy that they deal in is so fast and furious and so kind of different that it's hard for them to stop and slow down and think about that. And they'll deal with the aquifer next year, but right now they got to get this potato crop out. And so that's kind of where we are. We're 3 years into this, and they haven't really, in fact, Judge Kuhnel told them that they didn't, originally they wanted to deal with the aquifer first. They thought if the aquifer was recovered, then that would solve the problem. The judge said, no, you can't do that. You have to deal with the depletions to the river first. And so that's what they've done. And so that's why all of the finagling with the different, using Santa Maria water and all the things. Now we have cattle on the river, and we're with people who've been on the river for a long time down there, and their water rights have been great. They are always in priority. The sub-district #1 is doing its job. It's kept that river whole. And so the water is being delivered in priority on that river because they're doing it. They've got wet water in the river. So that part of it's working. What they haven't been able to do is economically keep people from pumping that extra water because they set their variable fee from whatever it was, $45 to $75 an acre foot, and at the time they thought that nobody will pump water for that. Well, even hay guys can afford to do that now. So they didn't really, that was a flaw.
So how's that going to work for the folks upstream, like folks in this part?
Well, your condition upstream is basically your condition, and the water that comes through that basin and through Crestone and is there just like it always was. The water table, I don't think, is, until you get out on the alluvial out east of town and kind of in that rock, there's probably some effects from pumping that far, but above that, it really isn't much. There's just no water coming down. I mean, we've been 10 years of everyone's in extreme drought, so, well, and we can't.
Yeah. And I'm just, thinking about, believe it or not, I've been here 20 years now. Yeah. And I just remember when I came here, coming in on T Road, the wet meadows, there were so many wet meadows, all these sunflowers blooming and everything like that. And when I look at that same landscape now, it's really dry. And that's reflected all over the valley, especially the northern part of the valley. And I'm just wondering, I just wonder if the planning that's being done is really going to be able to address the issues in the northern part of the valley.
Well, the planning The planning isn't, because it didn't take into effect the economy and how important or how strong that was gonna be. And as food gets shorter in the United States, which this is not the only place this is happening, every time there's a flood, every time there's a crop loss, that's food that doesn't make it to people's.
Yeah, and it's all over the country. It's not.
So it's probably not gonna change. And we gave those water rights as a society and a culture to those guys back in 1870. They developed those water rights and they did the priority system because they needed to develop the state. And so they gave people the absolute right to go out and divert water by God. And we grew up with that buried in our hearts and in our souls and our private property rights, and that's the only way to do it. But here we are, kind of on the back side of that. And if you look at the feedback loop, some of that's got to change, and we've got to change it in a way that's orderly and not chaos, you know. And that's like the subdivision. It's a messy, awful thing, but it's changing the way people see their water rights and their property rights, and they're starting to relinquish that, and they're leaving their guns in the pickup at least. You know? So it's it's a big change, and gradually. You know, it's a matter of time. Linda was talking about the Endangered Species Act and all of the work that you've done around that. And invasive species, for me, is a perfect example of people trying to decide, they have a paradigm that these are invasive. Somebody said this is an invasive species. They named it an invasive species. Therefore, it shouldn't be here. Thank God for knapweed. If it wasn't for knapweed, we wouldn't have anything to graze on a lot of our ranch, because that is a plant that is so tenacious and so tough, and it keeps the ground covered. I would rather have knapweed any day than bare soil. It doesn't blow.
Will cows eat that?
Yes, they will. And so we could have something worse. It could be something. But if the cows wouldn't eat it, then we'd find goats. I mean, it's not my job to say what should be on a piece of land. The land will develop whatever it can. It won't be like it was in 1989 when it was a flood. It's going to be and you know, those species, those microorganisms, whatever's there, they're going to adapt to the present, and they live in the moment. They live in what's there, and they're capable of that for millions of years, I guess. It's our time scale, you know. Remember, the trappers wasn't very long before to where we are now. So this has all happened really quickly. And we have this idea that we're in control and we own things, and we really don't. We're just hanging out. And we could do a lot to make life easier for ourselves and share in some of this, but we're going to have to, because Mother Nature doesn't really give a damn about my water rights. Yeah. So, anyway.
So George, what?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, what you're describing is resilience, and so you've adopted a philosophy of resilience based on letting the land tell you what to do, as opposed to what you think is in your business plan that you have to make the land do. So, like Bill was talking about a philosophy, and if we don't figure out as a culture how to change our philosophy and live with what we've got and live with each other, it ain't gonna work. It's not working.
Yeah, and we all have this idea that we're going to do with so much less. Maybe not. It doesn't necessarily mean we're doing with more. And you know, it could be, when you start to share things, you get more back sometimes. You give something, you get 10 times back. And if there's more of that, you know, it's not so scary. I don't want to live in my dad's John Birch world. I just can't.
That's a choice.
That's a choice.
Couple of things. The slide that you showed earlier, George, where you had the piles of hay out there.
Well, that one, and then I'll see.
Yeah.
Back a couple.
Back a ways. Well, my question was, when you went out with the cows on that particular section, did you keep them? Did you let them go through toward all of those piles, or you?
It's electric water. Okay.
Yeah.
We strip graze it.
And I kind of knew that, but I wanted to make sure that everybody else here knew that too.
Right. Yeah, we're in total control of these animals all the time. We do not, I'm sorry, I can push. So we just put out an electric fence out there, and we moved that. That's a piece of technology my grandfather didn't have.
Right.
That's a piece of technology that makes this possible.
Right.
Or somebody standing there herding constantly.
Yeah.
So we have a hot wire, and we just move it every day depending on how much those animals need, and they get fed every day. And the other thing is that the ground is frozen right now, solid. And so I invented a Whitten whacker. It's a slide hammer with a nail on the bottom, and I can drive a post in the frozen ground, a hole, and then we put our posts in. Julie moves.
Even I can do it.
Wow, she can do it every day, so we can move those posts over frozen ground.
Wow.
And you know, if you think about it, about a $500 fence charger and maybe $1,000 worth of wire and posts has replaced. Well, if I had to buy a new baler today, a new baler is about $180,000, and a tractor to pull it is about that much, and a windrower is $95,000, and a rake is, you know, I mean, I just no wonder you need to have $300 a ton for hay, and no wonder those guys can't quit because they got bills to pay. And so there's a part of this economy that has to make sense, and it has to be in human scale.
Right. So it's got to be an ecological scale. The other thing that you didn't show today was that I was lucky enough to go over and see your operation one day, and what you did to get rid of Chico on some section of your land was pretty amazing. Where you sequestered a section with the fence, but then you did take hay and you kind of threw it on top of Chico.
Right.
And then, go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about using fire for all this woody species.
Yeah.
Well, we do have hay, which I very seldom have, but sometimes I'll let somebody have my place for nothing, and if they'll feed hay in a different place every day and feed it on the brush, then they can just have it. And you can push that hay off on top of that brush, and those cows will break that all down. And it's better than fire, I think, because it cycles those nutrients through that cow's rumen, and it puts nutrients on top of the soil to get that litter, but it also adds urine and dung. Urine is worth 20 times more than manure. Everybody's concentrating on manure because that's what's left. But a cow puts out, let me get my numbers right, 48 pounds of urine every day and 60 pounds of manure. Now, that's not like it's lost. It's actually, it's fiber that's taken and then enhanced with the microorganisms in that gut and then put out on the ground. And that urine, the nitrogen in that urine is available immediately. The nitrogen that's in manure is available about 30% the first year, and then it deteriorates after that. And so, you know, dung is one thing. Dung is mostly really litter and covering and a place for insects to live. And I love to go out and pick up a cow patty and show everybody the little city that's in there, all of the insects that are living in that cow patty, because there's just a whole world going on in there. And then that's carried through those insects down into the soil and feeds those, which eventually feeds the grass. But it's cycles within cycles within cycles. But the urine is available immediately.
And it's irrigation.
And it's irrigation. That's 20 gallons of water that went from a tank out onto the landscape and was deposited out there. We're going to start charging BLM for it, I'm sorry. But it's worth $500 an acre foot. So.
Isn't there something too that the larvae that grows in the cow patty the next day or in the next few days, if you can get some fowl in there, some birds, they'll literally pull that whole patty apart and work all of that in with their claws, which is probably what the sage-grouse used to do before they were gone. So.
Well, there used to be a lot of native species of various sorts, you know?
Yeah.
Who worked through all that.
Right. And, you know, the whole native species thing, we lament the passing, but we have to get on. And
Use what you got.
we use what we have. I don't want to introduce anything that's not here, but on the other hand, when something shows up, I look it over pretty close before I decide I'm going to get rid of it, because it might be my salvation.
one of those bugs in the cow patties is dung beetles. And dung beetles, I went out to my pasture one day. I came to Colorado for a month, and I went home, and somebody stole all my manure piles. And I didn't know what it was, but it was dung beetles. And a dung beetle, they have the ability to take that manure that's up here on the surface where it can run into the river, and they bury it 1 meter deep. Wow. Right at the bottom of the root system. Isn't that interesting how that works? But if you ivermect your cattle, it kills all the dung beetles, and so you no longer have that ecological function. I mean, it's just ridiculous how this works.
If you do what, you kill?
Ivermect
Treat
is
them for pesticides.
it's for parasites.
Worms.
It kills worms and it kills lice and stuff that get on cows, and so if you use that, you're interrupting the mineral cycling that holistic managers talk about. And it's a free resource that you couldn't pay an army of Mexicans, no offense, to put the manure 1 meter under the ground where it can't run off.
Right.
It grows the grass that you're trying to grow.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
We need to really start to look at this stuff. Yeah. And you can put numbers to all this because he has.
Yeah.
And, shut up.
No, you have to be a lot richer than I am, though, somehow.
You got this woman in your life, you're as rich as you need to be. Well.
Anyway, yeah, good conversation.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something you said to me when I first got here and you started teaching me about holistic resource management, is that, everybody looks, kind of at this big picture of, where do we put the reservoir and where do we put these larger water systems. But you said, there's reservoirs in all the blades of grass. And everything, all the microorganisms, everything can be a reservoir. And that just completely, for some reason for me, that was just a huge moment. And I just realized, you're absolutely right. We always want to contain everything and, make it one solid thing. But in reality, that integration into all those other systems are really all the reservoirs we need. And we just keep forgetting that all the time.
And you went on to say, as I recall, that not only is it something that holds water, but it's self-replicating and self-healing. And you don't have to bring in a crew with a concrete truck and stuff to do all this stuff. So,
right. Well, the thing about reservoirs is we like it because you can measure it and sell it. It's hard to sell health to a farmer in organic matter in his soil because it's a long time. It takes that's that 1% number I use for that.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time to increase soil organic matter 1%.
With good management or bad?
Well, you can't do it with bad at all.
Which is what we've got across the entire nation.
But it's not like something we could do in a year or two. It could be done in 10 maybe. If I don't know.
How long is it taking John Hawes to add that to?
John Hawes he's gone from 2% organic matter to almost 9, which is, I just don't know of any.
In what time period?
In about 10 years.
Now that's
He's remarkable.
There's no university in the country that will tell you that's possible.
All sorts of different crops.
But he's got his numbers. He's got his own soil center. Yeah, you know John Hawes? You should talk to him.
He's an interesting guy. He comes to the soil meeting.
Which starts in 10 minutes.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but we're not.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just reading the lineup for the CSU's potato grain conference today, and it strikes me, and I worked for it for a few years too, but organic is not in their vocabulary very much. And it's not something that's pushed by a lot of agriculturists all over the country, for that matter. What do you think is the best way to, I know you're working to bring this message to the ranchers and farmers here. What else can we do? How can...
Well, it's kind of a complicated question because organic and organic marketing is one thing, and organic farming is kind of another in a way. The reason that we're certified organic is because there's a little better market for that, and we can always sell our cattle when there's might not be another avenue. But we're certified because somebody has verified that we're not cheating, and we're not. The amount of I don't know, it's 80 some pages we have to fill out to prove to the world that we are not poisoning people. And it's an arduous process. There's
And
two
we have to
inspections.
spend a lot of money too.
Yeah,
And we-
I know,
yeah.
it is.
But it's kind of a complicated thing to get into, but the word organic has been sort of co-opted by people who are marketing things. And it doesn't really need to be organic, it just needs to be whole. I mean, just because it says organic, there are other ways to do things. There are methods to do things that are not necessarily organic standards, because some of them are really draconian. There's some things that I'd love to try to do that I can't do because of these rules that somebody thought up somewhere who never really probably was in my position. But so we stick with those rules, and it makes us go to the root. And that's what we really need to do, is not talk about organic farming, but we need to talk about farming that goes to the root of the cause. What is the cause of that bare soil? What is the cause of this problem? And that's what organic is like, peeling an onion down until you find the inner core of that. And every problem has a core in the middle that is the cause. And we just pile stuff on that cause, and we've got a whole culture that's built piling stuff on top of a cause that we don't want to deal with. And that's what Mother Nature's going to make us do with this drought. She's going to make us deal with the cause. And whether it's population or whether it's whatever it is, we're going to have to deal with it. And it's coming. And so but there are so many layers to that. And that's what organic farming really should be about, is looking for the root cause of the problem, not going to the store and buying a syringe full of something to fix it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.